So one of the questions that we received was from a respondent, Mayor Cogswell, to the survey. And I will use this person's question because we promised we would try to make sure that we got some of your questions involved in this conversation tonight. And the question is, the setup to the question, first of all, is in the wake of the Mother Emanuel murders and the subsequent Charleston Strong movement, many perceive symbolic gestures such as monument removals and apologies are insufficient without tangible action. And the person's question reads, what specific, measurable initiatives has the City of Charleston implemented to address systemic issues like economic disparity, policing reforms, housing stability, and educational equity within the African American community since those events?
I threw an easy one out there for me. Well, I would start by saying not enough. When you look at the past 10 years since this tragedy happened, the reality of it is that the African American population of the city of Charleston has dropped significantly, and we need to do more. And I think that has become a huge cultural issue because it's been such an important part of our history and part of who we are. So in terms of what the city of Charleston is doing, I would say the probably most primary objective that I have, and I think council shares this with me, is to increase affordability when it comes to housing. And that's something that local government, I believe, has a very strong role in, and we need to be very aggressive about tackling. So we've worked with the Bloomberg Foundation to come up with, to do a very deep dive in our housing market, if you will. And the results of that study, which were presented to City Council and various committees, were really startling. And so what our objective is now is to achieve 3,500 affordable units in our city over the next 7 years. To give you some perspective on how big of a challenge that is, over the past 8 years, we've delivered about 400 units. So a lot of work to do, but I feel like on our council, we're committed to making this happen because it's not just a housing issue. As I said earlier, it's a huge cultural issue.
Mayor Cogswell, you said the population of African Americans, I imagine you're describing on the peninsula. Do you have an actual number in terms of how the number has decreased and over what period of time?
It's really not just on the peninsula. It's citywide. And if you look at the demographics, I believe that it was, and don't quote me on this, but it's almost dropped in half from roughly 22% to 13% in the past, over the past decade.
My mom grew up on Charles Street. My 85-year-old mother is here tonight somewhere. Mommy, raise your hand. And she grew up on Charles Street, and I remember we were just driving around one Sunday, and she said, "That's not the Charles Street I grew up on." She said it just like that. And I think you, having grown up in downtown Charleston as well, Mayor, you know that's true.
Well, again, you hear that a lot in Charleston, and it ain't like it used to be. And sometimes that's a good thing. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was growing up, not everything was perfect in the city of Charleston. It's not everything's perfect now. We've made some incredible improvements, but we've also left a lot of folks behind. And that is where I think we can do better as a community. Because again, we are known as the #1 city on earth and lauded for everything that's wonderful about Charleston. We have people here moving here in droves. And it's not just the built environment, it's not just the natural beauty of our landscape. But again, I truly believe, and maybe this is just because I was born and raised here, that it's the people that make us who we are. And so making sure that character is welcoming to folks. I'm not saying that we're in the treehouse and we pull up the ladder to new people coming in. I think it's a great thing that we have folks coming here. We have incredible, I like to tell people that we're the recipients of the brain drain from the rest of the country, especially post-COVID. And that adds a lot to our community. But we cannot forget the people that have made us who we are. And so it's incumbent on, I think, local government to really strive to do better in keeping our city more affordable.
Carolyn, I definitely agree with your mother, and certainly agree with you that the Charleston, I grew up in Charleston myself, on the east side of Charleston. It is not the same, and I remain concerned, and I'm certainly hypersensitive to the changing demographics and complexion and complexities of the peninsula, particularly being one who did grow up in the peninsula. And certainly as it relates to being a governmental official myself, that's why I am resolute to try to make certain that we do something, that stops that and enables us to provide, the types of affordable equation that enables everybody to thrive in a place where they live and where they can work. And so when I grew up in Charleston, of course, the peninsula itself was predominantly black during that time. We had like 4 or 5 high schools that were predominantly black on the peninsula. Of course, I graduated from Burke High School. Burke High School. And so I remain extremely concerned, particularly as you talk about the monuments. And amazingly enough, the mayor and I were talking about that just before we came on stage. I said, well, I was asking him about a monument in particular, but which I will not name on this stage because I don't want to resurrect it. But there was a momentum 10 years ago. There was a momentum and an energy that became the impetus for more to happen sooner, faster, and in a smarter way. We were telling a different type of story, even as a check and balance, because you can't erase everything, and we don't want everything erased, but there was also the opportunity to provide a story and a narrative that enabled individuals, when they're passing by or they're looking at markers, they can begin to read and understand and begin to deeply reflect upon some of the things that don't exist here anymore that used to exist, so that they could have a context of the complete, total change that has happened in Charleston. And I often say, and I love the International African American Museum, but I often say that the only representation of black folk on the peninsula is the museum. And so something has to happen and something has to change. And all of this was by design. By design.
Well, I will say when it comes to, again, affordability and keeping historically black neighborhoods populated and on the peninsula in particular, I will give a shout out to Chairman Middleton and County Council for working closely with the City of Charleston. I think we share this desire and this goal. And if we're going to be successful in turning this tide, we're going to have to work together as local governments because the City of Charleston cannot do it alone. The county can't do it alone. And so it's incumbent on us as local elected officials to work closely together. And we're not always going to agree, and we're going to have to negotiate, and we're doing that now on some property in good faith. But I'm very confident that we will be able to get there and work together, and I'm very optimistic.
Solicitor Wilson, you're stuck in the middle here, and I promise you I will get your question in just a moment. But I do want to follow up with you, Reverend Dr. Middleton, because your position on this stage and your position in this world is one probably unlike a lot of people. And what I mean by that is the way that you were impacted so deeply and personally by the tragedy at Mother Emanuel. Your best friend was murdered. You became even closer to his family, if that's even possible. And of course, your role as a leader, as a member of the AME Church, a pastor of the AME Church, and an elected official. And so 10 years later, I'm wondering how you are processing the many ways you were impacted by this, and then continue to serve as a leader and someone who is fostering reconciliation and offering guidance to others?
Certainly, it has not been easy, and I can't believe it's been 10 years because we have been active. We have been dogged and resolute to make certain that Clemente Carlos Pinckney, at least, along with the other 8 who were massacred in the tragedy, and the survivors, Jennifer and Milana Pinckney being 2 of them, that their legacy was more than what happened on that day. I could not believe when I received the call from Jennifer, because I just talked to them. They were coming down from Columbia, going to church as they normally would. They had a quarterly conference. I expected to talk to them after Bible study that night, as we normally would have. And it was a total different conversation after the Bible study, or when we finally reconnected at the conclusion of that evening. My son, who is now 29, working for the City of Charleston Police Department, and grown, I never imagined then having to step in, living in Charleston, going back and forth to Columbia. Eliana Pinckney just graduated from Temple University last month. Milana is a rising senior. And so there was a need. I heard somebody say in the previous panel that you had to step in. I'm the godfather. I was there literally when they were both born. And so when their father was murdered, I found it to be my mission to be present every day, or as often in the major moments of their lives as I possibly could. And so beyond being goddaughters, they're daughters. Beyond being, Jennifer's like a sister, just like he was a brother. And so we've known each other, for so long. And as I begin looking at all of the good things, because again, based on the things that the atrocity that happened on that day, out of that, came all of these, the Pinckney scholars, all the things that we can begin to articulate, enumerate, and list of the amplified good that the Pinckney Foundation continues to do, and then all of the associated foundations and causes that continue to lift the lives of these individuals.
Solicitor Wilson, Scarlett. We, of course, want to spend some time talking about some of the challenges that you face in the office, and we know that you have talked about it. You've talked about it when you were on the campaign trail, and certainly have talked about it before and after. And you've talked a lot about racial disparities, which has taken up a lot of the conversation on this stage tonight. And you have even, I think, openly talked about being challenged when people did not believe that you were being fair in some circumstances, and having to try to, I don't know if it's fair to say prove yourself, but certainly to convince people of your commitment to fair and equitable treatment for all. What are some issues that you want people to know about, that you have made it your mission to highlight and to bring forth as a dedicated elected official and community servant?
Thank you, Carolyn. I didn't start out on this journey of looking into fairness because I necessarily wanted to prove it to other people. I wanted to prove it to myself, because I felt like we, in my office, the prosecution office for this area, I felt like we were being fair. But as I sort of grew and learned more about data, and the danger of anecdotes, which is really what I see. I see anecdotes in my office. I can't see every case, every guilty plea, every dismissal, every plea negotiation. I became concerned because police officers and law enforcement are studied to death, and they have boxes to check and forms to fill out, and it's uniform across this country. But I started realizing that prosecutors don't have that. And I wanted to know if my office was being fair. And we began that journey shortly before Walter Scott was murdered, and certainly before the Mother Emanuel massacre. Those things propelled us forward into looking into whether or not we were treating similarly situated people similarly. And the first challenge that I faced was there isn't much data for that because prosecutors, unlike law enforcement, aren't required to keep that sort of data. So we had to really roll up our sleeves and try to clean up our data, get it into a way that it could be measured. Then we had to begin collecting data so that we could continue to measure it. And I'll tell you, it was scary because I didn't know for sure how that data was going to pan out. And what we learned, and I was relieved that really for the most part, we are treating people fairly. There were a few little blips that you couldn't necessarily attribute to racism or race having an effect versus something else, but those were areas that we could look at and try to do better in. So the first challenge was just having a way to measure and to study these things. And what I soon realized too was that what I wanted my legacy to be for the solicitor's office here in the Ninth Circuit, I wanted it to be a requirement and a practice and a procedure for us to collect that data so that moving forward, whoever solicitor after me would be expected to do that as well. One of the things that you mentioned the campaign trail, that I was criticized about was we did our study that I believe the results were published in 2021 was that, we haven't heard a thing about that again. Well, that's because you have to have enough data to study to measure a difference between our first study and the one that's coming now. And we are in the works of having the independent body continue to study the data and compare what our first study was to where it is now. So it has been a challenge. Lawyers don't go to law school and think they're going to be required to check boxes and fill out forms about what they're doing. And with what we do, sometimes it is a challenge to fit something into a box. But literally, we were having to create these fields so that that information could be collected. And it's, as you can tell, it's not a very sexy thing to talk about checking boxes and doing data analysis. But it is much better than the alternative, which is the internet and anecdotes and things that don't truly represent what's going on in our community or what's going on in my office. I'm committed to continuing to do this and to do this with an objective lens from someone else. I mean, it's very vulnerable, to turn your data over to someone else and say, tell us what we're doing. But that's what I've been committed to doing and what we've been doing since about 2015.
Would you say that is the biggest challenge in your office right now?
Well, the biggest challenge that we have right now is digging out of a backlog that we were struggling with before COVID, that COVID exacerbated. And, because we are here talking about race, Black people were disproportionately affected by that backlog and have been disproportionately affected by the backlog. We have had relief from our Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who has realized the critical situation we were in with the lack of court time, the lack of trial time. Our court time was slashed for no good reason that I've ever heard, but they are now beefing that up. And, what I tell people all the time is I can end the backlog in a day. I mean, I can just dismiss everything that we have. I don't think anybody wants me to do that, and that's not the solution. But what we have to do is we have to prioritize properly so that the repeat offenders, the most violent offenders, are being managed.
There were some questions, if I remember, and I don't have it in front of me right now, regarding the issue of bail and granting bail and those kinds of issues to push, I guess, to try to reduce the backlog and to keep moving things forward in terms of the judicial process, that there was the granting of bail too often? Is that something that the results that came out in this survey?
Well, the results regarding bail and Carolyn's referring to the study or the survey that was done by the forum were interesting because people, a vast majority of people, I don't remember the number, maybe in the high 70s, low 80s, were concerned about how money affected someone's ability to be able to get out versus, I mean, the study didn't get into this, but the argument is, if someone is dangerous, they're dangerous. If they're not dangerous, they're not dangerous. So how does money play into it? Why is money such a big feature of whether or not somebody could get out of prison or get out of jail versus their danger to the community and their flight risk? I think the other aspect of it was that even more people were concerned about the number of people who are released on bail who reoffended while on bail. And so it's a complicated issue because, I guess the idea behind requiring money to be put up is it gives people skin in the game because they're at risk of losing that money if someone reoffends. Where we see problems, and it's a problem that I'm seeking to address in a roundabout way, is when people are not violent and aren't a threat to the community and they're hemmed up in jail just because they don't have money. I'm not talking about murders. I'm not talking about armed robbers. I'm not talking about rapists. I'm talking about a nonviolent offender who may have a $2,000 bond set. If someone's been set a $2,000 bond, it's not because they're dangerous. That's just a number that somebody picked. And if a poor person can't make that bond, it doesn't mean they're more dangerous than somebody who's making a $150,000 bond for murder. So that's a problem. But one of the things that we're doing in my office to try to address this is studying low-level offenses and looking at those offenses where we've seen over time in looking at data that the charges are eventually dismissed because of a lack of evidence. Low-level charges that are dismissed over time for a lack of sufficient evidence. And what we're doing is looking at those within weeks instead of months, instead of years, and discerning through experienced prosecutors whether or not that case is viable. And if it's not, get rid of it. And that is having an impact, and that we aren't looking at just black people and we aren't looking at white people. We're looking at all of these charges that are low-level offenses that have been proven to be weaker cases. We're giving feedback to law enforcement so that we can improve the quality of those arrests. So it's not just about dismissing cases or diverting cases. It's about offering feedback to law enforcement to say, hey, these crimes are on the books. If you want to make arrests for those crimes, great, but let's make a case that will stick and not a case that gets somebody hemmed up who is either not guilty or doesn't have enough evidence to convict them. So it addresses, because it's low-level offenses, it addresses people who are in jail on low bonds as well.
Thank you for that explanation. Mayor Cogswell, we started this conversation and it very quickly went to an issue of who lives where and zip codes. And so I do want to bring the conversation back to that issue of, some would frankly call it gentrification. We've certainly heard that word a lot, and we even in the first panel heard redlining, another question, another issue that causes some people to be disenfranchised and marginalized. How does the city plan to engage affected communities in the decision-making process related to development, to prevent displacement, and to ensure that growth benefits everyone?
Sure. Well, we've talked about housing, affordability, and so I won't go cover that ground again. The city is working on a rewrite of its entire zoning code, which is very dated and needs an uplift. And we've been focusing on how to address issues like gentrification. And one of the ideas that, but coupling that with resiliency measures. I mean, another major issue our city faces, our region faces, is flooding. And what we're finding, just to be perfectly frank, is that those two initiatives or objectives often contradict one another. And an example of that would be where we're trying to reduce the amount of development in low-lying areas. Pretty logical goal, right? Because that's where the flooding is happening the worst. Well, we found that a lot of low-lying areas are also the home for settlement communities. So are we telling these people through our zoning that we are wanting you to move away from places that you've lived and your family's lived for generations? Well, that's gentrification through our zoning. So it's difficult to tie these two things together. It's a real challenge, but I think from my perspective, and I think from City Council's perspective, we're very focused on trying to figure this out. And what I'll say is that, I'm one of those that believes in, there's a lot of reasons why not to do things. You can always figure out a reason. It's the safest path typically to just say no or to stand still. We can't afford to do that anymore. We have to act. And what I would ask from the community is, we want your involvement, we want your engagement, but we also want your patience and understanding that we're going to try different things to address these issues head on, particularly gentrification and affordability, but we're not always going to get it right. And what I have a commitment to the city, and I think council would agree with this, we're going to try things. If it doesn't work, we're going to admit that it doesn't work, we're going to pivot, and we're going to keep moving forward in a altered direction, but not stop. Because again, we can't afford to have to sit idle at all.
So again, I say that these things are by design, because I remember even having family members who lived in the borough, which is kind of like, blocks away from here, and the land was contaminated. Everybody had to get out. And so they moved them all out and they were gone. But now we have the aquarium, and we have high rises, and we have all of these, developed places that have miraculously kind of emerged in the same spot that, those folk who had been living there for generations have been moved out, as related to just the, again, intentional design to develop that area in a different way. We have been intentional since I've been on Charleston County Council, resolute, micro-focused, and I mean laser-focused on making certain that there are other metrics and measures that we can use. We have a critical home repair program, and we've been pouring money into programs where individuals, even though development is happening all around them, you don't have to move out of your house. We can fix your house up so it matches everything that is around you. And even when your property value shoots up because everything around you begins to drive the market rates up, there are, again, programs that can begin to stabilize those persons who have been there for generations and generations and have that generational wealth transferred, particularly from not just all families and also black families, so that they're not pushed out and they can thrive in the same communities. Everybody does not want to move out of their community. So weatherization, envelope sort of issues, looking at those things that individuals who may not be able to afford on their own based on codes and standards and land regulations and all of these things that we create. And when we create them, the unintended consequence, or maybe the intended consequence, I'm not certain, becomes the gentrification that is a real thing. in the city of Charleston.
Mayor, I know that you are familiar with the borough because you grew up in downtown Charleston. So how do you specifically, because that's something that I've heard repeatedly. So let's just talk about that or as an example. Councilman Chair says that's by design. How do you respond to that? And this is not a debate for the record, but how do you respond to that when you hear someone who believes that this was by design, for example, because that is said very often?
Look, I can't say for certain. I mean, I wasn't involved in those conversations. That was, I certainly remember Ansonborough homes that were behind, huge part of that community over there off of Calhoun. But I certainly recall that when they were torn down, it was because of environmental concerns. And there was a lot of head scratching when all of a sudden they were talking about building office buildings and condominiums there. I get it. And I'm not sure why that was done. But in terms of where we are right now and what we're looking to do in the future and in the present, that is in no way, shape, or form the strategy or plan or design. So, yes, I'm sure, no question, mistakes have been made in the past. It is not just the city of Charleston, it's Charleston County, it's Berkeley County, it's North Charleston. Everywhere is facing this critical issue. Nobody's done it perfectly, but we need to work together to figure out a sustainable future.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been very generous with your time tonight, and panelists, you certainly have been generous with your time and your information and your expertise in adding insight. And so as we wind down these last few minutes, I'd love to give each of you an opportunity to tell this audience something you want them to know about your mission, your ideas, your thoughts, what you are doing as we look at the 10th anniversary of the Mother Emanuel Massacre. What is different in your professional work or personal experience as we look to move forward as a community?
I'll go first. I'm the only one on the stage that's not a Charlestonian originally. I grew up in a small town called Hemingway and was educated. If that's not in the corridor of shame, it's on the border of the corridor of shame for education. And so I was interested in the last panel, and you touched on it here too about education. And I still have my 8th grade history book, and I know what wasn't in it. And I didn't realize what wasn't in it until doing some work with the YWCA, Tina Singleton, LaVonda Brown, that I learned what was not in my history books. And that was shocking to me. And it's something that I can't change the education system here, but I can ensure that my prosecutors are aware, because I think it can affect, we want to treat people fairly, but we also want to have compassion, and we want to have understanding for how we got to where we are and how people in their everyday lives are in the situations they're in. And it all ties back to that history that wasn't taught to me. And I majored in finance, and so I didn't get any of those soft science or, liberal arts types of things. But I was, pretty old, I guess. Marcus would say I was pretty old when I learned some of these things. So I do think we have to be open and understand how important understanding our history is. If I could have one wish for our community, for people who are watching me in my office, is let's drop the labels and let's not retreat to our corners, and realizing, as the mayor says, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to stumble. But our mission is to be fair. Our mission is to see that we aren't contributing to negative impacts on our community. And that when we do restorative type justice, diversion programs, even dismissing cases, that with the data that we have, we can study whether or not it's having an adverse effect on public safety. And that's one of the studies that's coming out just in the next week or so that you may see about that. We're being very intentional about what we're doing so that public safety is not sacrificed because we want to feel good about things. I mean, our first mission is to protect people and to hold people accountable for their actions, but we can do both. We can do all of that without having an outsized negative effect on public safety or on people's lives.
I would say that one of the things I really love, probably love the most about local government, is that, as I tell people, potholes aren't partisan. To your point, Scarlett, that people retreating to into their corners, we know that's happening more and more in this world today, but especially in this country, and it's not a healthy direction. So I do think it is incumbent on local government to show how we can get along. And what I'm fascinated by is that the folks that I work with, either at the city or on city council or in other local government, even though we may have different backgrounds, different perspectives, different ideologies on certain things, there's a lot we agree on. There's a lot we agree on that really does impact and can impact people's day-to-day lives and their future. So that keeps me very optimistic, keeps me very motivated to really make a difference in this position by working with folks that from all across the spectrum. And one of the things I'll say too about Charleston in particular, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I do think we are a very, very special place. We have a love for this place that is incredibly deep, and it doesn't matter if you've just been here a year or two, or if you've been here 10 generations. There's just a passion for this place that people want to lean in, people want to help. And so that's an environment and that's an ethos that I think is ripe to do great things and to show the rest of the world that people can work together, people can be effective despite having differences. You can come together like the city came together after that massacre that happened 10 years ago in a very special and bonding way. And I think that's a light that we can carry forward in the future.
I believe that there is a greater, yes. I believe that there's a greater, higher purpose, and certainly we're all aspiring, to be our best selves and to contribute optimally in this society, in Charleston, in ways that causes our entire community to rise. I believe that everybody has capacity. Everybody has the ability. We have to create the equity and access and the opportunities for every single person to reach, their maximum optimal potential. I think that a light has to continually be shown on the things that we're talking about tonight. We have to keep open dialogue, conversation. Sometimes when we stop talking about a thing, that's where we go backwards and we end up repeating, some of the same mistakes that we've made over time, not necessarily meaning to, but somehow, human beings are recalcitrant. You just go back, to those defaults or the things that you're used to. And sometimes those things are comfortable, those things are familiar, those things become normalized, and before we recognize, we're right back where we started from. And so a light has to continuously be shown on those things. The drum has to be beaten in such a way that the rhythm, in Lift Every Voice and sing that anthem, it said, yet with a steady beat. And so we have to continue the cadence so that the march and the song and the imperative of justice permeates, penetrates, and it begins to infiltrate every sector, every part of our society, every area, so that we can have parity and we can have just equity across the board among all of our citizenry. And then lastly, I never wanted to be a politician. Never, ever in my entire life. And in fact, I used to disdain them. You know, I'm not certain if I still don't, but not you, I'm just saying. I mean, I said, you know, I resemble the remark, but I do recognize that you have to have a seat at the table. You have to be in the arena. You cannot be on the sidelines all the time thinking that you're going to change. I've learned the hard way that you can't change the system from outside the system. You got to get inside the system and get in a position where you are able to make the change from within. And so with every breath in my body, I don't know how long I'll live, but with each day God gives, I'm going to do something that'll make a positive difference.
Vertel Middleton's son, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a lot of fun. What an amazing conversation. I just want to personally thank my three friends on the stage, Mayor Cogswell, Scarlett Wilson, Reverend Dr. Kylon Middleton, for sharing this stage with me and for, again, offering your insight, your wisdom, your experience, and your candid perspective on how you are working hard in this community, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.